The easier-to-understand version of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, adapted by Sarah Simpson. Chapter 4. Gatsby's parties went all summer long, and rumors about him got bigger every day. "He's a bootlegger," a young lady at one of the parties said. "One time, he killed a man because the man found out Gatsby was the nephew of that German guy who got killed before he could be president. Gatsby is the devil's second cousin." Every important, famous, interesting person alive in 1922 came to Gatsby's parties. There were politicians from every political party. There were captains of industry. There were Broadway actresses. There were gangsters. A man named Mr. Klipspringer was at Gatsby's house for so long that people started calling him the boarder, like he was living at Gatsby's and renting a room there. Everyone who was anyone came to Gatsby's house in the summer of 1922. At 9 a.m. one morning in late July, Gatsby's beautiful yellow car pulled up in front of my tiny beach house. I had been over to Gatsby's house twice, but this was the first time he had ever come to my house. Gatsby was leaning up against the side of the yellow car. He was trying to look relaxed, but he could never hold still. He was always restless and fidgeting. "Good morning, old sport," Gatsby said to me. "I want to take you to lunch today. I'll drive us to New York." Gatsby saw me looking at his car. It was beautiful. "It's a pretty car, isn't it, old sport?" Gatsby said. "Haven't you ever seen my car before?" I had seen his car. Everyone in West Egg had seen his car. It was shiny and expensive and huge. The inside was soft green leather. Gatsby and I got in the car, and he started driving us to the city. It was a quiet drive. I had talked to Gatsby 6 times before, and he was always very quiet. It made the drive awkward. As he drove, Gatsby got more and more nervous. He was slapping his knee anxiously as he drove. Out of nowhere, Gatsby asked me, "Old sport, what's your opinion of me anyhow?" I wasn't sure what to say to him. "I'm going to tell you something about my life," Gatsby said. "I know people spread a lot of rumors about me, and I don't want you to think anything bad about me because of the stories people make up." I wasn't sure Gatsby knew about the rumors, but apparently he did. "I'll tell you the truth, I swear to God," Gatsby said. "My parents were rich. They lived in the Midwest. My whole family is dead now. I grew up in America, but I went to Oxford College in England. Everyone in my family went to Oxford. It's a family tradition." Gatsby looked at me out of the corner of his eye to see what I thought of the story. I knew why Jordan Baker thought Gatsby was lying about going to Oxford. Gatsby talked really fast when he said the words, "went to Oxford College." It was like he was in a hurry to get the lie out and over with. In my mind, everything I thought I knew about Gatsby fell apart. I wondered if he might actually have done all those bad things people said he had done. "What part of the Midwest are you from?" I asked. "San Francisco," Gatsby said. "Oh, I see," I said. "San Francisco is in California, which is very far away from the Midwest." "My family all died, and they left me a lot of money," Gatsby said again. Gatsby's voice was very serious. He sounded like he really was sad that his whole family was dead. I wasn't sure if he was telling the truth or not, but he sounded so sincere. "After I got all my money, I lived like a prince. I went to Paris, Venice, and Rome. I collected jewels, hunted big game, painted some pictures, and spent a lot of time trying to forget about something very sad that happened to me a long time ago." Gatsby's story sounded so fake that I had to work very hard not to laugh. "Then World War I started," Gatsby continued. "I almost died several times in the war, but I have amazing luck. I was a first lieutenant. In the Argonne Forest in France, I led 130 men into battle. We got stuck for 2 days and 2 nights, but we didn't give up. We waited for more troops to come. When more troops finally came, we won the battle. I was promoted to the rank of major, and every allied country gave me a medal for my bravery. Even the tiny country of Montenegro gave me a medal." Now I wasn't sure if Gatsby was lying or telling the truth. Gatsby pulled a medal out of his pocket. He put the medal into my hand. "That's the medal Montenegro gave me," Gatsby said. I was surprised. The medal looked real. "Turn it over. Read what it says on the back," Gatsby said. "Major J. Gatsby," I read, "for valor extraordinary." "I also always carry this photo with me," Gatsby said. "It's a picture of me when I went to Oxford College." I looked at the photo. It showed Gatsby standing with 6 other young men. The photo was obviously taken at Oxford College. Then it was all true. Everything Gatsby had told me was true. I didn't doubt him anymore. It felt amazing to believe him. "I'm going to ask you for a big favor today," Gatsby said to me. "I thought you should know more about me before I ask. I didn't want you to think I was just some nobody. I am almost always alone. I don't stay in one place very long. I go from place to place, trying to forget that sad thing that happened to me a long time ago. I'll ask you for the favor later today. Are you going to ask me at lunch? I said. No, you'll hear about what I want later today, Gatsby said. I heard that you and Miss Baker are having tea together later. She'll tell you. Are you in love with Miss Baker? I asked. No, old sport, I'm not in love with Miss Baker, Gatsby said. Miss Baker was just nice enough to be the one to talk to you about the favor for me. I had no idea what favor Gatsby could possibly want me to do for him. I felt more annoyed than curious. I didn't want to waste a date with Jordan talking about Gatsby. I was starting to feel sorry I had gotten involved with him. Gatsby was quiet for the rest of the drive. We drove through the Valley of the Ashes, and I saw Mrs. Wilson pumping gas at her husband's garage. We were driving fast. A policeman on a motorcycle drove up beside our car. Gatsby slowed down and got a white card out of his pocket. I couldn't see what was written on the card. Gatsby showed the card to the policeman. I'm so sorry, Mr. Gatsby, said the policeman. I'll know who you are next time. Please excuse me. The policeman drove away. I must have looked very surprised. I was able to do the police commissioner a favor one time, Gatsby said. Now he sends me a Christmas card every year. As we drove across the bridge into New York, a hearse passed us. There were flowers all over the hearse for the dead man inside. As we drove by, the sad faces of the dead man's family looked at us. As we went into the city, a limo drove past us. 2 black men and a black girl in expensive clothes were sitting in the back. A white chauffeur was driving the limo. The black man looked at us, daring us to say something to them. Anything can happen in New York City, I thought. Even Gatsby could happen. It was noon, and the city was hot. Gatsby and I went into a dark, cool basement with lots of fans blowing to have lunch. Gatsby went ahead of me to talk to another man. When I got close enough, Gatsby said, Mr. Carraway, this is my friend, Mr. Wolfsheim. Mr. Wolfsheim was a small Jew with a flat nose. When Mr. Wolfsheim looked at me, I saw the hair growing out of his nostrils. His eyes were so tiny it was hard to even see them. Mr. Wolfsheim shook my hand, but he didn't talk to me. He turned his giant nose back to Gatsby. Wolfsheim was in the middle of telling a story. I handed the money to Catspaw, and I said, Catspaw, don't give him any money until he shuts his mouth. He shut up after that. The 3 of us went into the restaurant. It was fancy and expensive. We sat down at a table. Can I bring you some drinks? The waiter asked. Yes, highballs, please, Gatsby said. This is a nice restaurant, Wolfsheim said, but I like the place across the street better. It's too hot over there, Gatsby said to Wolfsheim. I didn't think Gatsby was talking about the weather being hot. He meant that there were too many police in the restaurant across the street. I was starting to wonder what bad things he was doing again. Wolfsheim pretended he did not understand what Gatsby meant. Hot and small, but full of memories, Wolfsheim said. What restaurant is across the street? I asked. The old Metropole restaurant in the Metropole Hotel, Mr. Wolfsheim said sadly. I used to go to that restaurant with friends back in the old Metropole restaurant in the Metropole Hotel, Mr. Wolfsheim said sadly. I used to go to that restaurant with friends back in the old days. Now all those friends are dead and gone. I'll never forget the night they shot Rosie Rosenthal there. 6 of us were at a table. Rosie had been eating and drinking all night. It was almost morning when the waiter told Rosie that there was somebody outside who wanted to talk to him. Rosie tried to go, but I told him to sit down. I had a bad feeling. Let that bastard come in here if he wants to talk to you, I told Rosie. Don't get up from this table. Did he go outside? I asked. I pretended not to know about the huge gang shootout the Metropole that Wolfsheim was talking about, but it had been all over the newspapers when it happened. He went, Wolfsheim said. He went outside and they shot him 3 times in the belly, then drove away. 4 of the men who shot Rosenthal got the death penalty, I said, remembering. 5 men, said Wolfsheim. Wolfsheim's big nostrils flared at me. I hear you're looking for a business connection. Wolfsheim, suddenly changing topics, caught me off guard. Gatsby looked alarmed. Oh no, Gatsby said. This isn't the man who wants to do business with us. Mr. Wolfsheim looked disappointed. I think he liked me. This is just a friend of mine, Gatsby said. We'll talk about the business some other time. I beg your pardon, said Mr. Wolfsheim. I had the wrong man. A waiter brought a big plate of food, and Mr. Wolfsheim ate it quickly and greedily. The whole time he was eating, Mr. Wolfsheim never stopped looking around the room. He even looked behind him. I could tell he was looking for signs of trouble. It made me nervous. Gatsby turned to speak to me. Listen, old sport, Gatsby said. I think I made you angry in the car today when I wouldn't tell you the favor I want to ask you. Gatsby smiled his charming smile, but I was determined not to get sucked in this time. I don't like it when people keep secrets, I said. I wish you'd just tell me what you want. I don't understand why Miss Baker has to be the one to ask me for you. It's nothing bad, Gatsby said. Miss Baker is a sportswoman, so she always follows the rules. She'd never do anything that was wrong. Gatsby looked at his watch, then jumped up and walked quickly out of the room. Mr. Wolfsheim and I were at the table alone. Mr. Gatsby has to make a phone call, said Mr. Wolfsheim. He's a fine fellow, handsome and a perfect gentleman. He's an Oxford man, you know. Have you ever heard of Oxford College in England? It's real famous. Have you known Gatsby for a long time? I asked Wolfsheim. Yes, many years, Wolfsheim said. I met him just after the war. I knew he was a fine gentleman the first time I talked to him. I said to myself, that's the kind of nice man you take home to meet your family. He paused. I see you're looking at my cufflinks. I hadn't been looking at them, but I looked at them now. Finest examples of human molars, Wolfsheim said. Human teeth, I said, feeling sick. That's very interesting. Thanks, Wolfsheim said. He pulled down his jacket sleeve to cover up the cufflinks. You know, Gatsby's very careful about getting involved with women. He would never even look at a friend's wife. Gatsby came back to the table. Wolfsheim stood up, took a gulp of coffee, and got ready to leave. It was a nice lunch, Wolfsheim said, but I'm going to go now and let you two young men talk. You don't need to go yet, Gatsby said, but I could tell he was relieved Wolfsheim was leaving. It's nice of you to say that, but I'm an old man, Wolfsheim said. You two should stay here and talk about sports and young ladies and all the things young people like. I'm 50 years old. Time for me to go. Wolfsheim and I shook hands. He looked like he was about to cry. I wondered if I said something to upset him. Mr. Wolfsheim gets very emotional when he thinks about the old times when he was younger, Gatsby said. He's sort of famous around New York. Who is he? Is he an actor? I asked. No, Gatsby said with a smile. Is he a dentist? I asked, thinking about the cufflinks. No, Gatsby said. Meyer Wolfsheim is a gambler. He's the man who fixed the World Series in 1919. He paid the White Sox to lose on purpose. He made a lot of money gambling on the game. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was crazy to think that one man had enough power and money to mess with the World Series. Why isn't he in jail? I asked Gatsby. The police couldn't prove it, old sport, Gatsby said. Meyer Wolfsheim is a smart man. As I paid for lunch, I saw Tom Buchanan on the other side of the room. Gatsby, come with me. I have to say hello to someone, I said. Tom saw us coming and stood up. Where have you been, Nick? Tom said. Daisy's mad because you haven't come over to the house. Mr. Buchanan, this is Mr. Gatsby, I said, introducing them. Tom and Gatsby shook hands. Gatsby looked embarrassed. I'd never seen him look embarrassed before. What are you doing here? Tom asked me. This is pretty far away from where you work. I was having lunch with Mr. Gatsby, I said. I turned to look at Gatsby, but he was gone. He left without even saying goodbye. Later that afternoon, I met Jordan Baker at the Plaza Hotel for tea. She told me a story about Daisy when they were younger, 5 years ago in October of 1917. This is what Jordan said. Daisy Faye's house was the biggest house on the street. The year was 1917. Daisy was 18 years old. I was 16. Daisy was the most popular girl in Louisville. She always wore white dresses, and she drove around in a little white car her dad bought for her. The phone at her house was always ringing. People were calling to talk to Daisy. The army camp, Camp Taylor, was close to Daisy's house, so there were always handsome young soldiers coming over wanting to go on dates with Daisy. I was out on a walk one day. It was windy, and my new skirt kept blowing in the wind. There were red, white, and blue banners all over the houses. It was to show support for the army since the war was going on. The banners were blowing in the wind, too. I saw Daisy and a young soldier sitting together in her car. They looked very serious but very romantic. They were talking to each other and didn't notice me until I was standing right next to them. When Daisy saw me, she said hello. I was happy Daisy would say hello to me. She was older and popular, and I wanted to be like her. Daisy said the soldier's name was Jay Gatsby. After that, I didn't see Daisy as often. I got busy going on dates and playing in golf tournaments. I didn't see Gatsby again for 4 years. Even after I met him again, I didn't recognize him at first. He had changed a lot. I heard rumors about Daisy. even if I didn't actually see her. Someone told me her mother caught her packing a bag so she could sneak away to New York to see some soldier who was about to go to war. Daisy's parents kept her from going, and she was mad at them for weeks. Daisy stopped going on dates with soldiers after that. By next fall, Daisy was happy again. She had her debut after the war ended. By February 1918, I heard she was engaged to some man from New Orleans, but they broke up. In June 1918, Daisy married Tom. It was the biggest and most expensive wedding that ever happened in Louisville, Kentucky. Tom brought 100 people to the wedding from Chicago. He rented out 4 private train cars to get them there. Tom rented all the rooms on one floor of the Seelbach Hotel, the most expensive hotel in Louisville. The day before the wedding, Tom gave Daisy a pearl necklace that cost $350,000. I was a bridesmaid at Tom and Daisy's wedding. The night before the wedding, I came to tell Daisy it was time to go to the rehearsal dinner. Daisy was lying on her bed, wearing a pretty flowered dress. She was drunk as a monkey. She had a bottle of wine in one hand and a letter in the other hand. She had been crying. "Congratulate me," Daisy said. "I've never had a drink before, but it turns out I really like it." "What's the matter, Daisy?" I asked. I was scared. Daisy was drunk and acting weird, and I didn't know what to do. Daisy pointed to the trash can. The pearls Tom gave her were in the trash. "Take the pearls and give them back to Tom," Daisy said. "Tell him I changed my mind and I don't want to get married." Daisy cried and cried. I ran out of the room and found the maid. She helped me lock Daisy inside her room. We made her take a cold bath to sober up. The whole time, Daisy kept holding on to the letter, even in the bathtub. The water ruined the letter. I took it away from her, but it was falling apart and I couldn't read it. After that, Daisy didn't say another word. We made her sniff spirits of ammonia, hoping the bad smell would help sober her up. We put ice on her forehead. 30 minutes later, Daisy put on the pearl necklace and went to dinner like nothing had happened. The next morning, she married Tom and seemed totally fine. I saw Daisy and Tom when they got back from their honeymoon. Daisy was totally in love with Tom. Anytime Tom left the room, Daisy would get nervous and start looking around for him. They would sit on the beach together, and Tom would lie with his head in Daisy's lap for hours. All they cared about was each other. One night, I saw an accident on the road. It was Tom. He was with a girl who wasn't Daisy. Tom had crashed in another car and had ripped the front wheel off his car. The story about the accident was in the newspaper. The newspaper named the girl Tom was with since she had broken her arm in the accident. The girl was one of the maids at the hotel where Tom and Daisy were staying. In April 1919, Daisy had the baby. Tom, Daisy, and the baby went to France and stayed there for a year. I was in France during that year, and I saw them a few times. They hung out with a group of young, rich, wild people, but nobody said anything like that about Daisy. I think it's because she doesn't drink alcohol. When you hang around with hard-drinking people, you have an advantage over them. If you don't drink, you don't tell your secrets, but the drinkers do. Even if you do tell something, nobody will remember it. 3 more years went by. About 6 weeks ago, we all had that dinner at Tom and Daisy's house. As soon as she heard me say Gatsby's name, she was very interested in learning all about him. The night after you left and everyone was in bed, Daisy came to my room. She wanted to hear everything I knew about Gatsby. I told her all about him. In a strange voice, she said that it was a man she used to know. That's when I made the connection that your neighbor, Gatsby, was the same person as the soldier I saw sitting in the car with Daisy so many years ago. When Jordan finished telling me her story, we went for a walk in Central Park. It's a crazy coincidence it is that Gatsby wound up buying a house right across the water from Daisy's house, I said. It wasn't a coincidence, Jordan said. Gatsby bought the house so he could be close to Daisy. I remembered seeing Gatsby reaching out towards the green light across the water. He was reaching out to Daisy. Gatsby wants me to ask you if you'll invite Daisy over to your house and let him come over while she's there, Jordan said. I thought Gatsby was going to ask me for a huge favor, maybe even something illegal. I was surprised that the favor was so small and simple. Why wouldn't he just ask me? I asked Jordan. It's not a big deal at all. Gatsby was worried you'd be offended. He knows you're Daisy's cousin, Jordan said. Why didn't he just ask you to set up a meeting with him and Daisy? I asked Jordan. Gatsby wants Daisy to see his house, Jordan said. Your house is right next door. He has been throwing parties every weekend, hoping that she would show up at one of them. When I told Gatsby that you and Tom are friends, he almost didn't have me ask you. Gatsby doesn't know much about Tom, only what he has read in the newspapers while he was looking for stories about Daisy. It was dark now. I put my arm around Jordan and asked her to go to dinner with me. I wasn't thinking about Tom or Gatsby or Daisy anymore. I was only thinking about Jordan and how much I liked having my arm around her. Daisy deserves to have something fun in her life, Jordan said. Does Daisy want to see Gatsby? I asked. I don't know, Jordan said. Gatsby asked me not to tell her. You're just supposed to invite Daisy to your house for tea and let Gatsby show up while she's there. Jordan and I kept walking together. Both Tom and Gatsby were thinking about women they didn't have, but I had a woman with me right now. I pulled Jordan closer to me. This time I kissed her.